Salibonani, Lenjani, Molweni, Dumelang. Hello, good people. My name is Marvelous Nembo Chibagidi, and we are at the City of Kings, Kobulawayo, and we are the sidelines of the ZAMI 2022, which is the Zimbabwe Alternative Media Indaba. And today we are discussing climate change and human rights. And joining me for this episode is Manson, who will be helping me dissect climate change and human rights.
Yes, my name is Manson Gwanyanya. I work for an organization called the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. I'm the researcher and representative for the Southern and West Anglophone Africa region.
Okay, well, my name is Marvelous Nembo Chibagidi, and like you heard, I'll be interviewing Manson, and we're discussing climate change and human rights. So you know what, climate change sounds very scientific, sounds very foreign to the ordinary person out there. Maybe if you'll just help us define or just explain it in simple terms. If I was on Twitter, I'd say football terms. That's what Zimbabweans like. But if you will just break it down and make the ordinary person understand what we mean when we are talking about climate change.
Look, climate change is the change that scientists or researchers anticipate will happen as a result of carbon emissions in the world. So they anticipate that a lot of, in actual detail, not many people actually understand how that is going to work, but there's going to be a lot of changes in the weather conditions of the globe in general. So you might find that, examples that have been given is when there's flooding that happens in Malawi, particularly in the SADC regions. Those are the effects of climate change when people are using certain gas emissions extensively. So we need to reduce the way we use those. There's talk about moving to green energy, renewable energy, which will certainly reduce the green gas emissions, which then affect this whole debate on climate change. So I think that's a basic example from the understanding that I have.
And I'm sure if we are to bring it home, we've also seen the changes in weather patterns or seasonal changes in Zimbabwe, and even the recent cyclone Idai, where there was flooding, and many people were displaced and houses destroyed, livestock destroyed, and actually people dying. So those are some of the effects of climate change. Ban Ki-moon once said that climate change threatens our ability to achieve sustainable development, and in some cases our very own survival as humans. In your own words, as we're discussing climate change and human rights, why should we integrate human rights in climate change related actions?
So as the world tries to move from these gas emissions, there's a lot of mining that we anticipate will take place, so that we use green energy. So, for example, there's a lot of minerals, lithium, that are going to be used to manufacture batteries that are needed for renewable energy, and solar panels, hydrogen, and so forth. What is important to understand during that move is that a lot of human rights are most likely going to be affected. Historically, we know that mining generally is a very violent activity. A lot of communities are displaced from their homes or from their communities, some without compensation, some without even being consulted. So it is very critical for us then to understand that during that move, a lot of human rights might be affected, and us to keep an eye on how best for us to do. How best for us to move from that transition to renewable energy. That is what we advocate for as the Human Rights Resource Center.
And when you're mentioning that, like in extractive locations, extractive cities and towns, there'll probably be displacements when it comes to residents. And you mentioned that sometimes the compensation, sometimes no compensation, sometimes no consultation at all when the government or the authorities move those people. So which are the rights? There's so many universal human rights, obviously, but which rights do you think are actually most affected when it comes to climate change and when it comes to going clean and going green? Which rights are the most affected ones?
Look, almost any right might be affected, but the general ones that we see is the right to livelihood. So communities, for example, are living in fishing communities, they depend on fishing. Now, when these minerals are to be extracted, they are displaced and the water is polluted and so forth. So that's one of the rights that comes to play. Sometimes after the water is pollution, the right to water, access to clean water, is also affected. So in that instances, you've already affected two very critical, important rights that also speak to the right to dignity, in other words, or the right to life in general. So if a mining companies come to your community, PT, and they decide to start mining whatever mineral that is there, which will help us to move to the green transition, quite a number of our rights might be affected, but the most of them, the key one for me is generally the right to dignity. When communities are moved away from their areas where they live without consultation, when their access to water is affected, clean, accessible water, their right to life, their right to health is affected. So almost any right is most likely to be impacted, but it would depend on a particular context, on what the mining is taking place, what particular mining is taking place, and to what effects does that have in general. But I would certainly say that no right is
more than
yes.
okay.
And no one is safe, so to speak.
So everyone is in danger.
Indeed, yes.
The human rights law obliges governments and other GTP areas to respect, promote, protect, and fulfill all human rights. So who are the rights holders, and who are the duty bearers when it comes to in relation to climate change? Who are the rights holders, and who are the duty bearers when it comes to climate change?
So there's three critical role players in this whole scenario. The state, which is obligated to protect human rights. And then you have the individuals who hold the rights. So you and me, for example, who are living in a certain community.
We are the subjects.
Yes, the subjects, right. Someone might actually say we're the subjects. But then there's a third critical player, which we actually pay more attention to, which are the businesses, the mining companies, the companies that are involved in this extraction. They too bear the obligations not to violate the human rights. So if you look at the United Nations guiding principles, which basically look at there's three pillars: the right to respect, promote, and remedy. Companies likely are obliged not to violate the human rights, while the state is there to protect, so to shield the citizens from these violations by companies. But in certain instances, you find that even the state itself is involved in violating some of these citizens' rights, while they are the ones who are actually supposed to be championing, to say, no, we will not allow this to happen to our people in terms of the international human rights. Sometimes not even just international standards, constitutions, local laws that a number of countries do have certain legal provisions that seek to protect citizens and communities and so forth.
Okay. So, like you mentioned, that there's the state, there are the citizens, and then there's the businesses.
Yes.
But also, in relation to the Paris Agreement, what are the obligations of the state? And even if you could maybe give it a Zimbabwean context, also, but what are the obligations of the state with relation to the human rights and climate change?
So, yeah, you touched on an important agreement. The Paris Agreement has a lot. I've not even managed to go through it.
We'll need the whole
Yes, but what is important in that agreement is that states have agreed to do certain things to limit, or that will limit their emissions for carbon emissions. So Zimbabwe, for example, there's a percentage that they have, I think 30% or something, where they say we are going to do certain activities that will ensure that we reduce carbon emissions by at least 30%. That's the one part. But also in that agreement is also the obligations of the state to ensure that citizens are also protected. But the most important one is that they have actually undertaken to say we will do 1, 2, 3. Although not in written to say we're going to do this, but we are going to do certain things to ensure that we reduce our emissions. That then speaks to the mining of coal, for example, where if you reduce your capacity to mine certain fossil fuels, it also reduces the carbon emissions. And states have actually said we are going to do that. They've given themselves a certain period of time. I think 2030 is the goal. I'm not too sure if I'm correct. And they intend to do that. I doubt, though, whether they're actually implementing some of those things that they've agreed to.
You doubt.
Yes.
It's just doubt.
I think there's a lot of mistrust amongst these states, and some are saying, why are you telling us to reduce this when we don't have energy and so forth. So again, it speaks to this issue of just signing things and not implementing them back home.
Oh, okay. So sometimes it's always on paper, but
yes,
then when it comes
political.
to actually being done, on the ground is not there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Manson. So, as we don't want to make this very long and boring, but what do you think are also some of the challenges that states with the African, bearing in mind the African and the Zimbabwean context, are facing when it comes to ensuring that climate change, despite it being there and the monster that's already within us, but still human rights are still upheld? What are some of the challenges that countries or states are facing in upholding human rights in the face of climate change?
Look, I think one critical one is that there is already a shortage of, this whole issue goes back to the question of energy. When you have secure energy. A number of states, particularly the Western developed world, have sort of secured their energy security. They have it sufficient. Now, the question now that comes, a lot of civil society organizations and human rights activists, some who actually are for the move to the just transition, are also questioning whether it is wise. And I think many African states are also have the same question. Is it wise to simply say we are no longer mining coal when at the current moment we have load shedding in countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, I'm sure is not an exception. Yeah. I know for certain that Zambia at some point had load shedding. I think they've managed to sort of stabilize that situation. But quite a number of African states do not have energy security. Now, it will not be fair for us to then expect them to sort of just switch off when there is no reliable alternative. That's where the challenge comes, because now you have these companies which are willing to provide that energy, the dirty energy, at a cost or at a capacity that you can, but you're expected to completely switch off and move to renewable energy when you have no sustainable or any actual plan to actually change that current scenario. I think those are certain challenges that they have to face. Quite a number of people have said that we should not be forced or bullied by the West to just dump our current energy sources merely because of the climate change action. In certain instances, some have actually said that the West must actually give us the money to move to this just transition, because they are actually the ones who are responsible for the... Yes, certainly.
All right, thank you very much. He brought out the issue of the global north and the global south, and the fact that there are actually challenges already within the African states, whereby 600 million Africans actually have heard their energy requirements not met. So to then talk about the just energy transition and to then talk about other rights without having met that's one of the challenges for the African continent and with Zimbabwe in particular. Thank you very much, Manson. Any last parting words with regards to climate change and human rights, particularly with the Zimbabwean and the African context?
I think, for me, or for us as the Resource Center, really the message is that whenever you're going to move to this just transition, ensure that you do not violate human rights. You ensure that you take the communities along with you, consult with them, make them aware of what it is that you are doing. They must buy in. Because they are at the end of the day, they are the ones who are going to be mostly affected by this. So our message is really just ensure that if there's going to be any mining of just transition or whatever the case might be, ensure that you don't leave the communities behind. Ensure that they are involved. Ensure that they are fully aware and have also consented to some of these things happening. In South Africa, quite a number of companies have been taken to court. As recent as last week, Shell was told that it must stop exploring in the Wild Coast because they had not consulted with the community. So it's very, very key for companies to ensure that they consult. It's very important for governments to understand that they should not just go and put their views on the communities to say this is what is happening without the communities themselves being involved and having been fully consulted and having consented as well to some of these activities.
All right, thank you very much. We were discussing climate change and human rights, and like Manson was saying, that leave no one behind. Let the people know, consult them and raise awareness so that they know what they're getting themselves into in this journey of going clean, going green, and on the road to clean and renewable and sustainable energy. Marvelous name, Chibagidi is my name. Until we meet again, it's goodbye for now.